Welcome to the Bigger Room podcast. I'm your host, Mel Cobian.
And I'm Jill Bender. And today, this is episode 3 of our October spooky season episodes. Today, we're going to talk about scary movies that are based on actual events. And this movie wasn't based on an actual event, but did you know that in the movie The Halloween, John Carpenter got his idea for the character of Michael Myers when he was younger, and he had, as a school field trip, they visited like a mental institute, and he went into the section that had the most messed up mental patients. And in there was a 12-year-old boy. They didn't tell me like why he was in there, but as John Carpenter was walking past this boy, he said the boy just like stared at him with the most hollow, empty, terrifying stare as he like was walking by, and it scared him so bad, which created the idea for Michael Myers, because in the movie The Halloween, as a 12-year-old boy, that's when he kills, I think, his parents. And so that's where the whole idea and the mental institute and everything, which I thought was pretty interesting. But Mel, you did some research on a movie or two, right?
Yes. And I guess we'll start with that first one. I think everyone here has seen The Exorcist, the original one, the one that came out in 1973. You've seen it, right?
I didn't know it came out in 73, but yeah, I've seen it.
Yeah, it came out in 73. Yeah, I thought it came out maybe in the 90s, but when I was doing the research, it said 90. Yeah, I've seen it quite a few times, and the real case happened in 1949. Now, the main difference is that the movie is based on a girl, but the actual events were inspired by a boy his name was Roland. And I guess some things to clear up is in the real case, there was no projectile vomiting. There was no head spinning around. There's definitely no I know, right? There's definitely like no stabbing of the cross. I think everybody knows what scene I'm talking about.
How about when he crawls on the ceiling? Did that happen?
Or
goes down the stairs like upside down. It's terrifying.
Yeah, I mean, as you can imagine, right? Hollywood does a really good job of creating drama around some of these events. Yes. But so when you look at the real case, I guess it's not as terrifying as the movie, because something that I was reading about that stood out to me with The Exorcist is, compared to modern day movies, there was a lot of people that actually fainted, and people that actually threw up, and people that would walk out of the movie theater. Have you ever done that? Like, have you ever fainted or puked while watching a movie because of how scary it is?
No.
Have you ever heard that happening with movies?
No, I've heard of people walking out of the Terrifier 2.
The what? I'm sorry?
It's called The Terrifier. It's a man. He's got kind of like a white face with black dark features. He's usually bloody. Spirit Halloween has a character of him this year. The Terrifier 2, I've never seen either of them. They said it was so scary, people were passing out. That's what it was.
Yeah, so that stood out to me the most. A lot of people fainted, they puked, walked into theater. So that to me was kind of like, wow, that's crazy. Because the movie, in my opinion, is not that scary. It's just the idea that people can be possessed is terrifying. But again, we're talking about, this movie came out in the 70s, so it was probably the first time that a scary movie of that, degree was produced. Yeah. But some of the notes because I was comparing notes of like, okay, so what actually did happen in this to Roland? What actually happened to Roland? And what was reported is that he was starting to have violent behavior, which was very unlike him, and he had strange scratches that were showing up. But what made them call a priest, because the church was involved, they did a series of I don't know what we call them, I guess like exorcisms, that where the church was involved, and they would come over because furniture was reported that it actually moved. and his voice, which we would call, like a possessed voice, actually happened, and it was recorded. And you can actually find some of the recordings on YouTube if you dare to listen in. Yeah. What do you think of that? Super creepy.
I was actually thinking, I wish I would have locked my back door before we sat down to record this.
I think anytime somebody can't explain anything, it really, super, super creepy. But let's talk about your story.
Well, really quick on that. So I definitely have gotten super like, oh my God, wrapped up in the story of all these things. But I think as I've gotten older now, I feel like a lot of, and I just mentioned The Exorcist the other day. I think a lot of this was probably either over medication, like maybe they were medicating that kid, and whatever it was. Like I remember my grandma, they gave her some medicines as she was, she just passed recently, but as she was getting older, my mom's like, Grandma can't remember anything. All of a sudden, she like doesn't know who I am. All of a sudden, this and that. And then it was because her medication was too high. So as people get older and we're like, oh, they have Alzheimer's now, like that just kicked in or whatever. But it was actually the dosage was wrong. And once they dialed it back, she was fine. And she was remembering all of us again. And so more and more cases I hear of certain things with like medication, or it's kind of gross. But when I was thinking of it, it was a girl. This is why I mentioned The Exorcist. I was like, she probably just had TSS, toxic shock syndrome. So I did know of a case of a girl who did have that. Like somebody I knew had a friend, and the only reason she was able to get to the hospital was because her parents kept hearing her like talking in her room and like thrashing around on her bed, and they didn't know what the hell she was doing. And then they finally went in there and she was all over the place and acting completely nuts. And then they took her into the hospital, and it turned out she had toxic shock syndrome. So yeah, I think stuff like that could probably explain some of the stuff. I honestly don't really think it's like a paranormal or like a crazy demon possessing them.
Yeah.
But I like the idea of it because I do get into this stuff, which is why we're recording these. This is not my movie that I picked, but a quick little fun fact is that the movie The Birds, do you know that movie? Classic?
No, I haven't seen that. No.
You don't know of it or anything? It's an Alfred Hitchcock movie. Do you know who Alfred Hitchcock is?
No.
Okay.
Two things. Wow. I didn't grow up with the TV. I didn't learn English until I was 10. So, no.
But Universal Studios is big. They used to have an entire thing dedicated to Alfred Hitchcock. Maybe they had changed it over already by the time you went there. Because I know my sister, when she went to Universal Studios, California, she told us all about it. Alfred Hitchcock is who made, I think he also made The Bates Motel.
Okay, I've seen that.
Okay. Yeah. Okay, so anyway, The Birds is this beautiful Hollywood actress type lady. She moves to this little town. She's going to be a teacher. And there's all these birds that start coming out one day or whatever. And they are like dive bombing, attacking people, like pulling eyeballs out. It's a good movie. Like, you actually probably would like it even if you saw it now. Old movie, but it's good. My mom used to make us watch it every like once a year. She loved that movie. Well, that actually came up when I was doing research on movies that are based on live actual events. And that was something happened in California, and it was the seagulls along the coast were like going crazy, and they were dive bombing people's cars, people's houses, spraying half digested anchovies all over the place is what they said. And it turned out that there was some kind of like toxic poisoning that these birds had, and exactly what I was saying about this toxicity making your brain go crazy. So it was making these birds all go nuts. Well, Alfred Hitchcock turned that into a scary movie.
That's
I
crazy.
can't believe you.
I mean,
You never
yeah.
heard of him.
I think it's funny that was like based just on something like that. It's quite crazy how they add their own spin on it.
People are creative.
They really are. Yeah.
So
let's dive into your movie.
My movie is The Conjuring. If you guys have never seen The Conjuring, but if you're into paranormal stuff, this is like one of my favorite scary movies, hands down. And I think Mel and I had mentioned it before on previous October podcast. So the Conjuring, the house from The Conjuring, that was a farmhouse built in the 1700s. There was a family that had bought this house, the Perron family, in 1970. So this is a super freaking old house, old farmhouse. They bought this house. They moved in 1970. Husband, wife, and 5 daughters. All kinds of crazy activity. The oldest daughter, I guess, had been interviewed probably more than once, but on USA Today. And she was telling people that there was the spirit of, I had to write down the name, but I believe she's in the movie. She's like the witch character that's in this movie. Bathsheba or some kind of name like that. I don't know how to pronounce it now that I'm trying to say it out loud. She actually was the neighbor in real life. She was not a witch from what we know, but they made her the witch character. So she possessed this house also with a bunch of other spirits. And she apparently thought she was the mistress of the house and did not like the children's mom being there at all. She felt like that posed a threat to her, that this mother lived there, and she had a real problem with her. Nothing ever actually happened to them. So the daughter also told USA Today that when the spirits would arrive, it was usually around 5:15 in the morning, which is very interesting because usually spooky things happen around 3:30 a.m. So this came up at 5:15, but maybe because it's a farm and they get up early for farm life.
Yeah.
But she said when they would come, it smelled like rotting flesh. Like every time they were around, it was like this rotting flesh smell. So in the 1974 or something, they had called in the Warrens, and it was Ed and Lorraine Warren, and they are probably the most famous, well-known paranormal investigator team ever, but for sure in the 70s, I doubt there were very many of them that even existed. And they had gone in, and Lorraine was still alive up until 2019. And she had told many of the stories that the movie was based off of. So stuff that had happened while while they were investigating this house actually did happen. And even when with the movie, after it come out, same with the second one, there's a bunch of stuff that had been created from the stories that either that daughter had told or Lorraine had told at some point. And she confirmed that the majority of the craziness that happened in the movie was definitely based on stuff that had happened. And she came out, so they went out in 74. And the dad finally fired them and said, "You guys cannot come out," because it was upsetting everything, and they didn't have any money to move. So they were stuck there with these ghosts until 1980. They finally moved out of there. But I'm guessing that, Mel, you have another movie, and without saying the name, I'll leave it for you. I am guessing that the Warrens came up for you as well.
Yes, they did. Yeah, like you said, they're super popular, and all their stories, they have so many. You don't realize how many cases they worked on until you realize that they have quite a few of them that turned into movies, such as the Annabelle, right? I remember they also had, they still had that doll, or they still have that doll locked away. They won't release her. And so all these little artifacts that they collect from these cases, they have their museum, which I think last I heard, was open to the public. It was open to the public, but last I heard it was closed. Like they closed it off to the public.
I know it's in Connecticut, and now
It is in Connecticut. Well, I wanted to go when I moved to the East Coast, and we looked it up, and it said that it was closed to the public. I don't know if that was because of it was during the pandemic. This was during 2020.
Mm.
So again, when the Annabelle movies were starting to come out, and it's like, wouldn't it be just crazy or scary if we go to the museum? But then that's when it said that it was closed to the public.
Really quick before you start yours, one of the things that I thought was interesting was that the family that currently owns this house where they, based The Conjuring on, she said that since the release of those movies, now this house has become their living nightmare because all hours of the day and night, people are creeping around in groups, taking pictures and videos of their house. And she's like, they've had to call the cops so many times to get people out of there. It has been a living hell for them.
Oh, that sucks. I mean, that tends to happen with any show, any movie, in any genre. Like, oh, this is the house from that movie. Let's go take a picture. I think every owner has said the same thing. Yeah. All right. Let's roll into the last movie. All right. The last one is the Amityville Horror. That movie came out in 1979, the original. So I think it's been remade. I think it's been remade 3 times. I never saw the one that came out in 1979. I saw whichever one came out in the 2000s.
I've seen this.
What about you?
Many times. Yeah, I've seen the one from 79 several times, and then we didn't love it. It's weird. We had certain ones that we watched a handful of times throughout my childhood.
Yeah.
But I know I saw that one, and I did see the one with Ryan Reynolds.
Yeah, that's the one I watched. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So the original movie, for those of you that haven't watched it or just to jog your memory, it was basically a horror crime happened and then a family moved in, and basically the scenario that happened, which I'll explain, was starting to manifest exactly with the family that moved in. So in real life, there was a guy named Ronald DeFeo Jr. who murdered 6 members of his family in 1974. So he just was going a little crazy, slept in the basement, and then just went upstairs one night and just shot everybody with a shotgun. And then a few years later, the Lutz family moved in and started to basically document all the paranormal activity that was happening. But before I go any further, Jill, I had a question that came up as I was doing the research, why do we get so fascinated about the especially when it's a mixture of true crime and paranormal? Why do you think us as humans get so fascinated by it?
I literally have no idea. As a safety
agree.
Oh yeah,
agree that's a thing.
We do, but I would say it falls in the same reasons that people love fantasy and fiction, and it's something that's different from our own, day-to-day stuff. It's just some of us are a little messed up and we like the darker side of it.
Yeah. So the what was reported, what the Lutz were reporting, I do have to preface that they got a lot of attention immediately just for moving into the house. And so then after that happened, they were reporting things. So the main thing that I found is that there's still a debate whether what they were claiming to have experienced was true, because nothing was ever super crazy. The things that they reported was strange odors and then swarm of flies. So if you remember in the movie, these things happen where they would just say oh, what's the smell? Or out of nowhere, a whole bunch of flies would fly out of some, they'd open something and a whole bunch of flies would fall out. So that's where they're getting that from, is those, what they claim to have experienced. Also cold spots where they'd be in just one room and just take a few steps and all of a sudden they'd feel chills all over their body because it was just super cold. And also they claim to have had physical attacks, they'd be walking through the house and then they would get shoved. So those are the things they claim. All of this did happen in the movie as well, which isn't super, super crazy. But again, there's just never been any evidence. And the main thing being that because they were getting so much publicity, they feel that they just probably were feeding into it to get a movie deal, to be on the press, to be on the news, those kinds of things. Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah, I was hoping to, see like more actual truth or maybe evidence, kind of like The Exorcist. There's actual like recordings you can go hear. Given there's probably some psychological things happening with the kid, like you mentioned, there's all these other things and factors. Even being in a room like full of mold, that has an effect on the person.
For sure.
Yeah. Wouldn't you ever move into a house where a crime, like this person murdered 6 people, they're family members? Would you ever move into a house like that?
No. I mean, that house must have been dirt cheap.
Oh, probably. And again, it was because I remember in the movie also that it's also kind of like pretty in parallel with how they felt. It's all they could afford. Yeah. And they had kids. So it was very much how the movie happened in real life as well. But I think to like, it could be free. There could be a free sign on it. And I still wouldn't put it in an application.
I was gonna say I'd rather hike out into the local forest reserve and take my chances with getting caught, and I'd live in a freaking tent.
Yeah, exactly.
One of the things I thought in my research was interesting is that Scream was actually loosely based off of something, and they said no, there was nobody running around in a Scream mask killing people, but they said it was based off of a serial killer, Daniel Rowling. The Gainesville Ripper is who he was known by. And he was caught after murdering 5 college students in Florida over a span of 4 days, and then admitted to having way more killings than even that. So that was kind of interesting.
The Texas Chainsaw was based on a true story as well.
I almost did something on that one because my mom even said that. Just like that one, but I did read something on the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and they said that the movie was very loosely, it was mostly based on, there was a guy that did chase people around with a chainsaw, but like he didn't like it, nothing like what
it was. The use of human skin that was like that like specific thing is based on a true, like based on the real life events as well.
Leatherface.
Yeah.
There's a another, the Hannibal Lecter, that is based on
really
a true story. People are disturbing.
They are. So I have one question to leave the readers with, and you guys can definitely answer this in the comments, especially if you're watching on YouTube, and share with us your favorite movie. Is the question. Do you think that the possibility that these things exist, like things that we cannot explain, like the paranormal, do you think that exists?
Are you a believer?
Yeah. Are you a believer? I am, because of my personal experiences.
Am. And I told you originally why.
Yeah.
Didn't want
There's always a little bit of skepticism, right? There's always that human skepticism, like, well, I don't know. But then I'm also like, I'm like, well, everything's a possibility. So
I have a very scientific brain, so I do think that a lot of it could be explained. But I do like the idea of stuff like that just being possible.
Yeah.
I don't like the idea of somebody being possessed to where they're going to harm other people, but a good ghost, a nice ghost here or there that, knocks your coffee cup off the table is okay with me. Now I'm never buying another house. I can't move. We're stuck here. That doesn't even... Okay, I know we're almost out of time here, but I have a lady, my mom's friend, her husband passed. I think he died of cancer, only in his 40s, or I think he was in his 50s, right? Left his wife, and I think he had 2 daughters. And after he died, the wife had all kinds of crazy things happening where she'd come home and all of her kitchen cabinets would be open, or she'd come home and, like a chair would purposely be moved into a weird spot that only your husband would have done. And there were a lot of things that were happening that were just like only your husband would have done. And she even would say, like, Dan, I know it's you. Can you, like, I'm happy, I'm happy you're here, but it's also, like, a little scary. So, like, let's tone this down kind of thing. And she said it went on for, like, months after he passed. And I said, was it an old house? And they're like, no, we built that house. It was only maybe like 5 years old. So even in a newer house. And then she said one day she, like, looked up, and it kind of, like, where the sun was shining in, it looked way more sparkly than normal. And she said she could kind of see the silhouette of her dead husband. And it was kind of like him saying goodbye. And then nothing else happened at that house after. And it was, like, kind of like, it was, like, done. Yeah. So I don't want to see any of it. That's the episode for today. We hope you enjoyed it. Thank you so much for joining us on the Bigger Room podcast. Make sure you tune in for the next 2 weeks of October. So we're going to have more spooky episodes.